大家好，今天是2025年的5月16号，我们来聊一下黄金。黄金的价格最近这一段时间一直在上涨，最高的时候达到了大概3500美元每盎司的这个高点价格，所谓的历史高点。然后最近这一段时间呢，又进行了一个回落大概到了3200多美元每盎司的这个价格。大概差不多快跌了，离高点的话跌了10%，所以说现在市场上对黄金的这个价值投资又有一点这个恐慌情绪，所以我们对这件事情呢，先来看一看10年前人家这个巴老爷子的对黄金的一个看法。
This question comes from Neil Steinhoff, who writes, the commodity market, and particularly gold, have appreciated astronomically over the last few years. My Berkshire Hathaway stock is only slightly better or doing better than it was in 2006. It's barely kept up with inflation, he says. Please explain why you have not invested more heavily in commodities. As long as Ben Bernanke continues to print money, and there's no indication that he's going to stop anytime soon, isn't it right that commodities, and particularly gold, will continue to appreciate?
Well, I would point out that when we started with Berkshire, it was about 3/4 of an ounce of gold, and gold was $20 an ounce then, and it was 15. So gold, even at 1,500, has a ways to go. And I think he's right about inflation, but if you think about it, there are three major categories of investment. And you ought to think very hard about which category you want to be in before you start thinking about the choices available within that category. Now, the first category is anything denominated in a currency. It can be bonds, it can be deposits in a bank, it can be a money market fund, it can be cash in your pocket. And if you will reach in your pocket, I don't like to do this, but and pull out your wallet. You're watching an historic event. If you look at this, and I might point out this is a 1, Charlie carries on the back of it, it says, "In God we trust." And that's really false advertising. If Elizabeth Warren were here, she would say, quite properly, it should say, "In government we trust." Because God isn't going to do anything about that dollar bill, if government does the wrong things in terms of keeping it as valuable as it was when you parted with it to buy a bond or put it in a bank. Any currency-related investment is a bet on how government now and in the future will behave. And if you happen to be fortunate to live in Zimbabwe and you decided to make currency-related investments, your family would have left you by now, and it was not a good decision. Almost all currencies have declined in value over time. I mean, it may be built into almost any economic system that it will be easier to work with a currency that declines in value than a currency that appreciates in value. And the Japanese might reaffirm that here with their experience. So as a class, currency-related investments, whether they're in the UK or the United States or any place else, unless we're getting paid extremely well for having them, we do not think make much sense. The second category of investments regard items that you buy that don't produce anything, but that you hope someone will pay you more for later on. And the classic case of that is gold. And I've used this illustration before, but if you take all of the gold in the world don't get too excited now. And put it into a cube, it will be a cube that's about 67 feet on a side. It'd be 165,000 or 170,000 metric tons. So you could have a cube, if you owned all the gold in the world, you could have a cube that would be 67 or 68 feet on a side. And you could get a ladder and you could climb up on top of it and you could say, I'm sitting on top of the world and think you're king of the world. You could fondle it, you could polish it, you could do all these things with it, stare at it. But it isn't going to do anything. It's all you are doing when you buy that is that you're hoping that somebody else a year from now or 5 years from now will pay you more to own something that again can't do anything. The person then thinks that somebody else will buy something 5 years later from him. In other words, you're betting on not just how scared people are now of paper money, you're betting on how much they think a year from now people will be scared 2 years from then on. Keynes described all of this. I think it was in chapter 12 of the General Theory when he talked about this famous beauty contest where the game was not to pick out the most beautiful woman among the group, but the one that other people would think was the most beautiful woman. And then he carried it on to second and third degrees of reasoning. Anytime you buy an asset that can't do anything, produce anything, you're simply betting on whether somebody else will pay more for, again, an asset that can't do anything. And actually, we did that with silver, but silver had an industrial use. And about 13 years ago, I bought a whole lot of silver. And if you'll notice, silver's moved recently. So my timing was only about 13 years off, but who's perfect? The third category of asset is something that you value based on its what it will produce, what it will deliver. You buy a farm because you expect a certain amount of corn or soybeans or cotton or whatever it may be to come your way every year. And you decide how much you pay based on how much you think the asset itself will deliver over time. And those are the assets that appeal to me and Charlie. Now, there's some logical follow-on to that. If you buy that farm and you really think about how many bushels of corn, how many bushels of soybeans will it produce, how much do I have to pay the tenant farmer, how much do I have to pay in taxes and so on, you can make a rational calculation, and the success of that investment will be determined in your own mind by whether it meets your expectations as to what it delivers. Logically, you should not care whether you get a quote on that farm a day later or a week later or a month later or a year later. We feel the same way about businesses. When we buy ISCAR or we buy Lubrizol or whatever, we don't run around getting a quote on it every week and say, is it up or down or anything like that. We look to the business. We feel the same way about securities. When we buy a marketable security, we don't care if the stock exchange closes for a few years. So when we look at Berkshire, we are looking at what we think can be delivered from the productive assets that we own and how we can utilize that capital in acquiring more productive assets. And there will be times, cotton doubled in price, much to our chagrin at Fruit of the Loom, but if you own cotton for the right 6 or 8 months in the past year, you came close to doubling your money. But if you go back a century and try to make money owning cotton over time, it has not been a very good investment. So to pick a product, crude oil, cotton, gold, silver, anything that, and of course cotton has utility. Gold really doesn't have utility. I would bet on good producing businesses to outperform something that doesn't do anything over any period of time. But there's no question that rising prices create their own excitement. So when people see gold go up a lot, if your neighbor owns some gold and you think you're smarter than he is and you didn't own any, and your wife says to you, how come that jerk next door is making money, and you're just sitting here, it can start affecting behavior. And people like to get in on things that have been rising in price and all of that. But over time, that has not been the way to get rich. Charlie?
Well, I certainly agree with that. And besides, it's something peculiar to buy an asset which only will really go up if the world really goes to hell. It doesn't strike me as a terribly rational thing to do. I think you ever figure on leaving the country because the country is going to kill you. And if you assume all the other countries you might go to will also be thoroughly screwed up, I think all those people should buy a little gold. But I think the rest of us would be better off with Berkshire Hathaway stock. And of course, there's another class of people that think they can protect themselves by buying paintings of soup cans. I don't recommend that either.
One thing about gold also is that in addition to this 67-foot cube, more gold is being produced every year. So you have to have buyers not only to offset sellers in the natural course of events, but you have to absorb something like $100 billion worth of added items of no utility. I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, they dig it up out of the ground in South Africa and they ship it to the Federal Reserve in New York and they put it back in the ground. I mean, if you were watching this from Mars, you might think it was a little peculiar, but think of how many people it makes happy. I might mention that the value of that cube, all the gold in the world, is now about valued at 1,500 plus, is about $8 trillion. And there are 1 billion acres roughly of farmland in the United States. That's a little over 1.5 million square miles. And that's valued at something over 2 trillion. And if you take 10 Exxon Mobils, you get up maybe another 4 trillion. And maybe not that much even. And so you could own all of the farmland in the United States, every bit of it. And you could own 10 Exxon Mobils and you could stick $1 trillion or so in your pocket for walking around money. And you could have your choice of that or this 67-foot piece of gold that you could fondle. And that may seem like a close choice to some people, but not to me.
Well, you would also need an army to defend the gold. And it's really not a very good spot.
好，这个是2011年巴菲特在股东大会上对一个黄金投资的这个观众的问题的回答。相信在这个资料之中，这是巴菲特对黄金投资的一个比较详细的一个讲解。总结来说呢，这个巴菲特其实他不光是在讨论黄金，是讨论他的投资品的一种框架。他把投资品呢大概分成3类，第一类呢是货币类型的这种投资品。什么叫货币类型的呢？就像我们手里拿的这个钞票啊，银行的存款，还有这种跟这个货币相关的货币型基金啊，这是一类。这类资产呢，其实是它的底层的话是跟这个发行这个货币的这个政府有关系的，它是政府信用基础上的一种纸币行为，本身来说它是长期会贬值的。这个因为它货币超发，这是它天然的现在纸币的属性，所以说它这种投资品的话，这种货币相关的投资品的话，本身它有这种贬值的这种所有的货币都有这种贬值属性。同时呢，它这个其实它还是对这个货币背后的这个叫什么叫政府有相关性。如果这个政府的这个当前的执政和未来的执政产生了这种危机，那这个货币也就相对来说进行也就没有价值了。像他说的这个津巴布韦啊，这些小的东南亚国家啊，货币长期大幅量的贬值啊。第二类呢，就是他说的这个实物资产。实物资产呢，代表性呢就是说到的黄金。 实物资产有一个特点，就是它不能在创造，在这个过程中啊，在这个历史持有的过程中，它不能直接创造价值。你像黄金，它的意思就是说把黄金像金砖一样放在家里持有，然后它又不能变多啊。所以说呢，黄金这种实物呢，它只有2个特性。第一个特性呢，就是所谓它对应的货币贬值，它是一种抗通胀的这个属性。那因为对手盘的这个货币进行了贬值，所以黄金的价值也就提升起来。但是他还说到另外一点，我觉得非常重要的一点，就是黄金的话，它不光跟货币贬值有关系，它还跟投资人的这种个人倾向有关系。对应的还有就是像这种字画类的、这种艺术品类的这种，它在长期的持有中都不会进行升值，不会创造价值。但是它只能期望于未来的一段时间，由另外一个投资者以更高的价格从你手上把它买走。可以说叫击鼓传花啊，它是一种击鼓传花的这种游戏。只是在击鼓传花过程中呢，你的下一手击鼓传花的人依然对这个物品还有他的这个投资意愿，仅此而已。当巴菲特说到了第3点的这个投资品的话，就是这种能够在持有的过程中产生它的收益譬如说这种农田，它能在过程之中产生这个农作物的收成。然后譬如说它这种公司的话在经营的过程中它有这种企业的这种盈利，它利用这种日常的收益来体现它长期的一个价值农田它利用收成多了之后，它可以再去买农田，这农田会越来越多。它在持有的过程中，它是不断产生收益的这个投资品。所以说，综合来看的话，巴菲特对于黄金的话，它是属于一种叫实物不能产生日常收益的这样的一个资产，所以他不看好黄金，也不持有黄金。相对应的，他还说到，他还持有白银，曾经有一段时间持有白银，只不过说，不是一个成功的投资但是白银至少它有它的价值，在工业品里面，在这个电子元器件各种工业品里面，白银是能用到工业品里面的，它是有它的使用价值的。那黄金呢，大部分都是纯粹是一种投资价值和一种人的情绪价值。所以说，我们就暂时再总结一下这个巴菲特的这个对于黄金的他的认知大家可以反复来看一下巴菲特对黄金的这个，包括芒格对黄金的这个理解，我相信对大家的投资的这种眼界和认知能够开拓很多的。另外呢，就是黄金的话，在整个叫投资品市场里面，其实分为2类，一类是这个实物黄金交割，还有一类就是黄金之上的这种金融衍生品的交割投资交割。这个实物交割呢，主要在全球的话都不在中国都是实物交割在这个就是英国的伦敦商品交易所，主要在伦敦交易。然后对于黄金之上的金融产品，包括衍生品、期货期权还有这些合约式的交易的话，都是在美国，大部分在纽约和芝加哥2个大的商品交易所。所以说我们在投黄金的时候，其实很少有人去像中国大妈一样去持有黄金，然后买一个金条，买个金项链，然后等价格涨了之后再把这个金条、金项链卖走。大部分投资品还是投资客来说的话，都是买这种叫金融产品，也就是说我拿不到这个实物的，我只是买一个这个价格，买一定量，然后这个价格涨上去了，我就卖出，赚取我的差价就结束了，也不进行实物的交割的。所以说呢，全球这样的一个黄金的这个投资市场的话，大部分都是集中在欧美欧美是有它的定价权的，特别是美国，美国是黄金投资的绝对的定价权的这个场地。所以我们在投资黄金的时候只能说是跟随或者是参与。所以说在黄金现在达到这个历史高点达到3400、3500的这种价格，现在开始回调。 所以说我想大家一定要谨慎啊，特别谨慎这件事情，因为做局的是在美方，我们作为中方的话，面临这种做局的话，一般来说很有可能会成为韭菜被割的。所以说大家呢回过头来再重新审视一下黄金作为这种投资品的这种价值啊，也重新看一下这个巴菲特和芒格在10年前对于黄金这种投资品的一种分析和理解。好，这一期就到这，谢谢大家。